just reassessed. So I know that people have questions, and this seminar is designed to answer your questions. Now, one thing that I asked the assessor's office to talk about as well is the recent changes that have been made to our assessment system for commercial vacancies, because that has been a concern in our community for decades and decades. And I believe some of the assessor's work is beginning to bear fruit in that regard. So I'm very, very glad that the assessor has come to answer our questions, and look forward to having everyone's questions answered tonight. So thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a really exciting, exciting for the assessor's office, which isn't exciting for normal people, but exciting for the assessor's office that we get to talk about our vacancy policy, because we think it is contributing to a lot of economic development. And it's also helping to make property taxes more fair for everyone. So when the important thing to know about property taxes is that when one person isn't paying their fair share, somebody else is paying more than they should. And so it's really important that we make sure that we are assessing everybody fairly and making sure that folks are not getting too much of a break on their property taxes as a result of vacant buildings is really important. So I want to give a chance for Senator Feigenholz's office to say a few remarks, if they like.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm Maggie O'Keefe. I'm the Chief of Staff to Senator Feigenholz. Good to see everybody on this call today. The Senator would love to be here. She had another event this evening, but I will leave our information in the chat so you can always reach out to us at your convenience. We are there for you. We know that this is a big topic right now, especially in the North Chicago Township. And for anyone that's listening that isn't in the North Chicago Township, I'm sure Scott will be able to help with your upcoming assessments. So reach out anytime, and thank you all for attending. And thank you, Scott and Kelwin Harris from the Assessor's Office for putting this all together. Scott, I think you're muted.
You're muted, Scott.
You'd think I'd be good at this by now, and you'd think I'd have that, but every
You're
once
great.
in a while, I don't quite get it. Well, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, everything we're doing in here tonight, talking about assessments, is going to be applicable to you regardless of what township you're in. So if you're not in North Chicago Township, all of this will still be very applicable to you. A couple housekeeping notes. Please, any questions that you have, put them in the Q&A box. The reason we ask you to do that is because it's a lot easier for our staff to handle all those questions. I have two of my excellent outreach colleagues with me, Michelle and Hector. They are going to be in the chat answering all your questions. We will do some live Q&A as well. So we'll take some of the more broadly applicable questions, and we will talk about those live. But some of the stuff that folks tend to have questions about is often very specific to their property. They might have a question about, certain things that go on with, maybe they're in a condo and they want to know something about their condo board and how they apply, use appeals. So we want to make sure that we're getting not just the general questions, but also the specific ones. So at any time, feel free to put your question in the Q&A. You don't have to wait until our presentation is over to start that off. So feel free. We know a lot of folks, it's still kind of nice out. You may not want to spend your whole hour in here with me and my colleagues talking about property taxes. I totally understand that. So feel free to ask your questions as they come up, and we'll hopefully get those answered. And hey, if you want to stick around, we are going to be talking about that vacancy policy. So lots of good stuff to come. So we're going to talk a little bit about some things that you should know as a property owner who was recently reassessed in North Chicago Township. There's one of the things that we really try to do is demystify the property tax system as much as possible. Now, a lot of folks have an idea about how their property taxes work. They think when they get an assessment in the mail, however much the assessment goes up, that's how much their property taxes are going to go up. And it's actually not true. Our property taxes and our assessments are interconnected. So what is an assessment? By law, your assessment should reflect the market price for your property. So when you get that assessment notice in the mail and you see that big number up at the top, that should be what you think your home or your property is worth. Markets are changing all the time. For people who are residents, they change quite a bit. The COVID pandemic has caused a lot of people to go looking for bigger homes or homes that maybe have an office or homes that just allow them to spend a lot more time, in and around with their families. And so home prices have gone up quite a bit because more people are trying to buy, but the supply of homes isn't necessarily increasing. The other thing you need to know is that market prices for your assessment are a reflection of what has happened in the past 3 years. So a lot of people look at their assessment and they look at the most recent year. They look at last year and they say, my assessment went up X amount in just 1 year. How is that even possible? One of the things to keep in mind is whatever your assessed value was 3 years ago, the last time Chicago was reassessed, chances are your assessment has not changed in 3 years. Now, you do get a property tax bill every year, and then we'll talk about how that's different from your assessment. But the assessment notice reflects changes in the market over the past 3 years. And here's the other thing that most people often don't know is that they're all interconnected. So you need to be concerned not just about with your assessment and making sure it's fair, but everyone's assessment. You want to make sure that everyone's getting assessed fairly. Now, you're going to look at your assessment and you're going to say, perhaps, my assessment's gone up 30%. You're going to say, does that mean my taxes are going to go up? Not necessarily. What your assessment is about how much your property value has increased. But you've got commercial properties, you've got other homes in the area, and those homes are all going up a certain amount, as are those commercial properties. What we found is that a lot of commercial properties in the past have been underassessed. And so bringing those assessments up to market value is something that is happening right now. And so a lot of commercial properties are going up more than the average assessment of a home. Your assessment is really about your share of the property taxes. So let's say your assessment goes up 30%. If all of the homes in your area are going up similarly, maybe 30%, maybe 25%, if everyone's assessment is going up around the same amount, then everyone's share of property taxes is going up the same amount. And if everybody's kind of going up the same amount, while assessments are also increasing about the same amount, then chances are there isn't going to be a huge increase in property taxes. Now, what's happened in other neighborhoods is that commercial assessments have gone up more. And so their share of the property taxes has gone up more, which means that residents are tending to have a kind of a flat or even just a slight increase. Over the last 2 reassessment cycles that Assessor Kagi has been handling, the average tax bill increase has only been 1%. So again, a lot of people think that if that assessment goes up 40, 50%, which is unusual, that means it's going to be an increase in the taxes of the same amount, and that's not true. So let's take a little bit of a look at the way in which property values have unfolded here in North Township. This is a map of your township. We live in Chicago, and so most people are not familiar with townships. Townships tend to be a thing that people pay more attention to in the suburbs. But for North Township, this is essentially the map, and you can see the way property values have broken down. We've had some pretty, this is an area where property values are higher than other parts of the city. But people ask all the time, is my assessment the same as other people in the area? Are you looking at my specific neighborhood? Are you looking at my specific street? And as you can see, if we look at sort of the southwest portion of the township, you can see that this is in the kind of mid-range of the assessments. If you're looking up here around North and Clyburn, those are in about 250 to 500,000 range. When you get down into more of the southeastern portion of it, those are in the more of the $1 million to $2 million homes. And again, you're just seeing sporadic areas throughout where you're seeing increases of single family property values that are different in other areas. So when people wonder if we are looking at location, location is one of the most important things we look at when it comes to assessments. So let's talk a little bit about how much North Township is increased. Again, what you want to look at is not just about your assessment, but how much the overall increase in value was. So an increase in your property's assessment doesn't mean the same increase in taxes. But if other assessments go up more than yours, your taxes might not change much. So in the right-hand side of this slide, we have a graphic that shows the increase in residential versus non-residential, or what a lot of people call commercial properties. So the overall increase in residential value went from 3.2 billion to 3.7 billion. You can see that line is just kind of a gradual increase. But when you look at the non-residential value, commercial assessments went up quite a bit. And that again is due to what a lot of third-party studies have shown, that there was underassessment in commercial properties. So what does that mean? According to this graph, more of the increase in assessed value has been in commercial property in North Chicago Township, which means that the increase in property tax share, according to these initial assessments, is mostly happening in commercial assessments, which means if there are going to be increases in property taxes, at this point, more of those are being borne by commercial properties than by residential properties. So even if your assessment goes up significantly as a residential homeowner, you're not necessarily going to see the same tax increase because more commercial properties have gone up at a higher rate. So for residential homes, what kind of numbers were we seeing? Median sale prices of homes in North Chicago were about 1.1 million for single family homes and about 320,000 for condos. So we're talking about sale prices in 2020, right about in the middle. It's essentially what we're talking about when we talk about the median. We are estimating, therefore, based on those sales prices, that the median 2021 market values are between 900,000 and 1.4 million for single family homes, and between 270,000 and 420,000. Now, does that mean that everyone's home falls into that range? It doesn't. That's the median. So that's kind of right in the middle. We're going to have some that are less. We're going to have some that are more. And when we look back at that heat map that I was showing you earlier, that shows the range of different prices that are in North Chicago. So this is right in the center. If you are finding yourself in the median, you are going up. Your market values are going up about the same as most of the folks in the middle. If you are finding that you are under the median, that means that more people are taking on more of the property tax burden than you are. So it's possible that you might see a decrease in your property taxes, or it might just remain flat. If you are above the median, it's saying that for residential homes, your property has increased more than most in the area. But again, keep in mind that commercial property assessments have gone up a lot more, and so they are already taking on more of the tax burden. The biggest question to answer for yourself about deciding whether or not you want to appeal is not about the increase in your property's assessment. Assessments are always going to increase during each reassessment year because they're a measure of market activity in the past 3 years. So overall, most people want their home to increase in value. It is an investment. For most people, it is the biggest investment they have. And so they want to see their home increase in value. Now, when it comes to property taxes, most people don't want to see their assessment go up. But since assessments are a measure of the market value of the home, they do tend to go up every 3 years. But the question is, are you paying more than your fair share of property taxes? If you look at your assessment and the assessment is more than what you think that home can sell for on the open market, then that's a good reason for you to appeal. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. 1 second. Get back to where I'm supposed to go here. All right. So another question folks want to know is, how do I know that my assessment is fair? We're going to talk a little bit about some complex metrics here, but overall, the assessments of single family and condominium properties met industry standards for high quality assessments. What does that mean? We look at a few different things when we're coming to measuring the fairness of assessments. We look at something called the median ratio, which is really how closely did our assessments hit the mark in terms of what properties actually cost. If we hit it right on the money, that number should be 1. If it's a little less, it means we perhaps underassessed certain properties. If it's above 1, it means we may have overassessed a little bit. The measure of fairness says that we should be within 10 to 15% of a property's value. And you can see that we've actually increased the fairness for the bottom. We've gotten it right about the measure where we were in 2018 for the bottom third, but for the median, we've gotten that even more accurate than we were in the past. And for the top third, we've fallen just a little bit outside of that green zone, which is exactly where we want to be. So there's a little bit of a less than one for those. But for the most part, for residential assessments, when you look at those metrics about how fair we were, how accurate we were, how our property assessments compared to all of the assessments in the area, we've gotten it pretty much on the mark for fairness. We have a lot more data about the ways in which we've made assessments more fair on our website at cookcountyassessor.com. And I'll show you another webpage where you can go to get more information about that. So we talked a lot about the balance between residential and commercial. And so a natural question is, how much more tax burden am I going to take on with these assessments? At the end of the 2018 reassessment cycle, about 46% of the overall tax burden was being paid by residential homeowners. So that means for your area, how much in total property taxes were being paid. For residents, they were paying about 46% of that total tax burden. For all other classes of property, commercial, and that includes vacant land, big retail properties, large apartment buildings, anybody that's offering affordable housing, all of that is in that like yellow space where all other classes. They were paying about 54% of the overall tax burden. With this initial reassessment, what we've seen is that value, or I'm sorry, that tax burden for residents has decreased to about 38%. So it's actually gone down, and it's increased for non-residential properties. So again, vacant land, big commercial retail, commercial apartments, that sort of thing. Now, these percentages might change a little bit after appeals. We take appeals as well as the Board of Review takes appeals. And so those numbers are going to change a little bit. We are going to publish an updated version of this graphic and this chart after the appeals are done in our office and after the appeals are done in the Board of Review. So the important thing to look at if you're a residential homeowner is how much that number changes after appeals, because you'll be able to tell whether or not your share of the tax burden has gone down still after all of those appeals are filed. And if the total residential tax burden has gone down, and if that's maintained after our initial assessments, then it's likely that you could see a slight reduction in your property taxes, or at least have them remain generally flat. Another important thing to keep in mind with property taxes is it's not just about your assessments. We have local levies, so that's the City of Chicago, our Chicago School District, the Park District, the libraries. All of those are taxing districts in the City of Chicago, and they all file what are called levies, which is basically how much money they need to run their operations. So assessments divide up that levy amongst all of us. So when we're looking at these numbers, that 46 to 38%, that's how much the overall tax burden has gone down for residential homeowners. That's how much of the share of those property taxes that have been levied you may be taking on. So it's why it's important to look at that number and see how much it fluctuates after appeals, because it's going to be a good early indicator as to what your tax bill might be next year. And that's another important thing to keep in mind. Assessments that you receive this year are going to be reflected on your 2022 tax bill, specifically the second installment tax bill that you get during the summer. Most people think that the assessments are going to be a reflection of whatever tax bill they get next. So you folks have just received your assessment notice. You may think you may be looking for that first installment property tax bill that usually arrives in the beginning of the year and looking to see how that first installment is affected by your assessment. But because appeals are still being taken, we won't actually have those assessments be reflected on your taxes until the second installment tax bill that comes in the summer. So we've got a lot of different data on assessments that's published on our website. If you go to cookcountyassessor.com and go to the data menu and then select valuation reports, you can see a whole report devoted to the North Chicago Township reassessments. There is a report for single family homes. There is a report for small multifamily apartments. So that's 2 to 6 flats. And there's a separate report for condos. And those are the numbers that you're seeing here on the screen. So you can see all the ways in which the sales and the market values change depending on the property type. The top line there is the single family homes. The second line is for multifamily, and the bottom line is for condos. So for folks who really want to dig into this data, you can go ahead and look up those reports, but we can also take some questions about that in the Q&A. So keep in mind, we want to make sure that any questions you have are going in the Q&A box. Make sure to put them there because it makes it much easier for our staff to answer those questions. So as Alderman Smith alluded to, we do have a new commercial vacancy policy. This is one of those things that is a policy of our office that has a big effect on overall property tax burden. So the vacancy policy determines how a property can appeal its assessment based on the building either being partially or completely vacant. So when you see a vacant property on your block in a commercial district, what that's going to show is a type of building that can apply for an appeal based on vacancy. So the way this works is they get their initial assessment based on how much we think that property is worth in the open market. We allow them a certain level of vacancy based on the market. Let's say retail properties in the 43rd Ward are, based on our data, about 10% vacant. And a property that is a commercial property can then apply for additional vacancy as part of their assessment. Maybe they're going to tell us that, in fact, they aren't 10% vacant, but they're 50% vacant. They can apply for that based on an appeal. What they have to do is they have to give us photos, they have to give us utility bills, they have to document it in a number of ways to show that that property is not just 10% vacant, but is 50% vacant. In the past, the office used to give commercial property owners up to 90% of vacancy. What this ended up doing was reducing the assessed value of the property significantly. What that meant is that property's taxes were also going down. So what ended up happening is other commercial properties and residents were taking on more of that tax burden because that property was vacant. The problem is that just because a property is vacant doesn't mean it's any less valuable. You might sell it to somebody else who has a really good way to put new tenants in. You might sell it to a developer who is more interested in just making sure the space is filled rather than being very selective about the type of property that goes in there. And so what we started doing is reducing the amount of vacancy you can claim on appeal, and therefore reducing the amount that you can actually cut your assessment, and therefore reducing the amount of tax breaks that you can get on that building. So now, instead of being able to claim up to 90% vacancy, you can only claim half of the actual vacancy that you received. So again, let's say that property is 50% vacant. You can only claim 25% of the vacancy on an appeal. And what this does, because this is, by the way, not just something that benefits the commercial tax base, it also benefits the residential tax base. First of all, it encourages more economic development. If someone is getting less of a tax break because a building is vacant, then they are more likely to try to rent that building out. It also expands the tax base. When you expand your tax base, you are reducing the overall tax rate, because essentially what you've done is you've got more property value to spread out the overall tax burden. And when we spread out the overall tax burden, it means it falls less on other commercial properties, and it also falls less on residents. So this is something that, most people don't think about when they're thinking about their assessment notice in the mail, but this commercial vacancy policy is really important because what it does is it increases the tax base, which ultimately reduces tax rates for everybody. So that's very specific information to North Chicago. We're going to get a little bit into appeals and exemptions now. So the responsibilities of the assessor's office is really to set those assessments. We have 1.9 million parcels in Cook County. The value of those properties is not determined on an individual basis. We are not going around to all 1.9 million properties. we are using a mass appraisal system. We are looking at the types of properties that are in an area. We are looking at, folks that are 2-bedroom, 3 bathrooms, and we're comparing those to the sale prices of other similar types of homes and properties. The reason for that is because if we were just using the individual sales of a property in order to determine that property's value, it may end up introducing unfairness into the system. For example, let's say you have a property that has what's called an arm's length transaction. Maybe it sells to a family member. Maybe it sells to someone who knows the property owner. Because that market value is lower, it might drive down assessments of other similar properties, which would mean that those properties are actually paying less in taxes than they should. Similarly, you might have a property that goes for an extremely high property value. Let's say that property just had some rehabs done. Let's say that it was a tear down and they built a new property on that particular parcel of land, but it's very different from the other, let's say, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom types of properties. We don't want that high value of the property to necessarily apply to all the other properties on that block. So what we do is we have a really extensive sales database that takes a look at all different kinds of similar properties and uses a mass appraisal system in order to figure that out. Now, that's assessments. The other important thing we do is we administer property tax exemptions that can contribute to lowering your property tax bill. And we'll talk a little bit more about exemptions in just a moment. But I think what most people want to hear about are appeals. So we are asking folks to do online appeals because normally what would often happen in the past is somebody would come into an elected official's office, or maybe they'd come down to the assessor's office. They would ask for a paper form and they would have to fill that out, mail it in. They'd have to wait for the response. And it was a long process, and it also required people to actually go to a specific place in order to file that appeal. What we've done is we've vastly expanded the accessibility of online assessment appeals. It is a free thing to do, and you do not need a lawyer. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are getting things in the mail from property tax attorneys who are saying that they can file an appeal for your property. They can get you a reduction in your property taxes. As you all know, a change in your assessment does not always lead to the same change in your property taxes. So the other thing to keep in mind is that nobody knows more about your home than you. So while you may get something in the mail that says a property tax attorney can file this for you and get a reduction in your assessment that leads to a reduction in property taxes, you have that same power. You have that same accessibility. You do not have any, or they don't have any of the tools that you don't have. You can go on to cookcountyassessor.com. You can go to the appeal section and select appeal online and file an appeal. You will need an email address, and it's best to start filing when your township is open for appeals. Everyone here in North Chicago can file an appeal now. You are open, I believe, until mid-November. I'll have to double check that date. But I believe that that's when North Chicago is open until. Do you have the ability to upload attachments? Let's say somebody wants to file an appeal and they want us to know the condition of the property inside. They can upload photos inside the online appeal system in our attachment section. You may have information about other properties that are similar to yours that you want us to know about. And you can put descriptions of those properties. You can put PIN numbers. Maybe there's something that happened to your home. Maybe there was a fire. Maybe there was a flood. You want us to know more information about the condition of your property. You can upload Word documents describing that to us, submitting photos, all that kind of thing. Now, you can also do something that's called using comparable properties. There is the Cook Viewer program, which allows you to look at different properties in your area and submit comparable properties, or you can actually use the online appeal system itself to look for comparable properties. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then once you have that appeal filed, the appeal results will be sent to you by the post office in regular, as they like to call it, snail mail, not via email, but you will receive the results of that. You will, however, get an email once that appeal has been processed, and you can go online to actually look up the appeal results. So important thing to keep in mind is, will your taxes decrease if you file an appeal? That's possible. A good rule of thumb, if your property taxes are, or if your property characteristics are correct, and the estimated market value is within 10% of what you think your home is worth, then appeal might not change your property's value enough to significantly affect your property taxes. If, however, the market value that you received is more than 10%, or maybe it's more than 20% of what you think your home could go for on the open market, then an appeal could be warranted, especially if, when you look at those property characteristics, we've got something wrong. So maybe we have the square footage wrong. Maybe we say you have 4 bedrooms and you only have 2. Addressing those property characteristics that we have wrong is a really good thing to do in an appeal, because that it could be something that could make a material difference in the size of your assessment, which could also make your property taxes go down. So there's 3 reasons why you might file an appeal. The first is what they call a lack of uniformity, meaning you have the same type of home as other people have on your block or in your neighborhood, but your assessment is much higher than other people. You can file what's called a lack of uniformity appeal. And what you're essentially doing there is you're giving us information about those other properties in your area and saying, these homes are very similar to mine and they are under my assessment. My assessment is much more than theirs. The other thing you can do is you can file what's called an overvaluation appeal. Maybe, again, you feel that we have overassessed your home for some reason. For example, maybe you believe that the assessment of your home is based on other homes similar to yours that are new homes. And maybe you have a home that is 90 years old, maybe it's 100 years old. We see that with a lot of homes that have a lot of history to them. And so we may be overvaluing your home because we're not taking enough into account about the age of the home. Or you may have an incorrect property description. So again, this gets back to what we were saying about maybe we have the lack of the number of bedrooms wrong. Maybe we have the square footage wrong. So that's an important thing to file an appeal on as well. There are a number of factors that affect your tax bill. We've talked before about your assessment, and we've also talked about levy increases from local taxing bodies, schools, parks, libraries, that sort of thing. The other factor that affects your tax bill are exemptions. As a homeowner, you receive a homeowner's exemption. If when you receive your tax bill, your second installment tax bill, you don't see a reduction there for your homeowner's exemption, you would want to make sure that you're filing for that exemption. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The other thing that affects your tax bill is the tax rate. Tax rates here in Cook County change every year. They change based on changes in assessment. Maybe some folks are getting more exemptions than they used to, and they also are affected by the levies that are filed by cities and municipalities. So, for example, the city of Chicago is now tying its property tax levy increases to the inflationary rate. And so when that cost of living is going up, they're also tying the increases in the levy to that as well. So overall, there are a lot of factors that go into your tax bill. The total assessed value of your city or town is really a thing that you want to look at. We talked about that earlier in the presentation, that when there's an increase in your assessed value of your area, that can mean lowering the property taxes. So what are exemptions? We've talked about that a bunch. Many of you probably just finished paying off your second installment property tax bill. You saw exemptions on those second installment 2021 tax bills. You may have seen that you were missing an exemption. If you were missing an exemption, you likely filed for what's called a certificate of error. The different types of exemptions we administer as part of our office, we have a homeowner, we have a senior exemption, which is offered to people who are 65 years of age or older. We have the senior freeze, which is available to people who are 65 years of age or older and who make less than $65,000 a year. We also have exemptions for persons with disabilities, returning veterans, veterans with disabilities. We also have something called the longtime homeowner exemption. Now, many people hear that and they think, I've been in my home for 10 years. That means that applies to me, that I get a longtime homeowner exemption. Or maybe you've been living in your home 25 years. Long-time homeowner exemption is about living in a home for a particular amount of time, and also for the amount that your assessed value may or may not have increased. And so it's important to think about not just how long you've been living in the home, but how much your assessed value may or may not have increased. There's a specific formula for that we have to take people through. So most people think that they can apply for a long-time homeowner's exemption just because of the length of time that they've been in the home, but it's an important consideration about how much your assessed value has actually gone up. And there is also a home improvement exemption as well. So when you get your tax bill, the most important thing to do is check that tax bill and see if all of the exemptions that you're due are on there. This is the place to look at. If you can look at the lower left-hand corner of your tax bill, you'll see homeowners exemption, senior citizen, and senior freeze exemptions. You'll also see disabled persons exemptions, veterans with disabilities, etc. Now, if you don't remember which exemptions you received previously, you can go to cookcountypropertyinfo.com and look up the number of exemptions that you received before. And if you're missing property tax exemptions, you can file for something called a certificate of error. The important thing to keep in mind is you can actually file for a certificate of error for missing exemptions for up to 4 years. So let's say you didn't know that there was a senior exemption available because you're 65 years of age or older. You can actually file for back years for those exemptions up to 2017. So if you are a senior at this point and you have been a senior, you've been over the age of 65 since 2017, but you did not have that senior exemption on your tax bill, you can go ahead and apply for a certificate of error on our website at cookcountyassessor.com, and you would then get a refund for the overpayment in taxes on your previous tax bills. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's an important thing to tell your friends about, because most people they think that if that year has passed, they can no longer apply for that homeowner's exemption or that senior exemption, but you can apply for it for up to 4 years. So I'm going to take a brief break just to introduce briefly the Cook County Assessor, Fritz Kagi, who has joined us. Fritz, if you've got a moment, please feel free to unmute and say a few words.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone, for being here with us tonight. We know you can be in many different places, and this is probably not the ideal place to spend a beautiful summer evening. But you got a lot of information that you can use here tonight. And I hope Scott also gave you some information that gives you a larger perspective on how the system works. I think one of the things that's most important to remember is that your assessment is only meaningful compared to how other people are assessed as well. What that means is that as assessed value grows in the rest of the city, your share of assessed value can actually fall, and that can cause your tax bills to fall. And this is one of the things that we really want to communicate in this year. Assessed value in Chicago so far is up about 50% this year. So folks who had assessments that increased significantly less than that, which is true of a lot of homeowners in North Township, we're on the path to a pretty good path come the tax bill time next year. Now, of course, the most important thing is to make sure that your assessment is done correctly. That's what you can do as a citizen, and make sure that you have all the exemptions that you have. But we just wanted to give you a little bit of additional information here tonight to help you be in terms of citizenship and understanding, is our assessment doing the job for you, assessment system doing the job for you. It's not just about how we're assessing you. We should really be evaluated in terms of how we're assessing others, because assessments are a mirror to the market, and we've really made sure that we're identifying areas that have been under-assessed before, and that translates into a lower rate for you and a lower share of the burden for you. So that was the real key thing I wanted to communicate above and beyond that information that you can use here tonight. And I can help with the Q&A too. I know that's usually the best part of these discussions.
Yeah, we've got folks from the office. Hector and Michelle are here to handle a lot of the Q&A as well. So obviously, We've got all hands on deck here,
Okay.
Assessor Kagi. So
And actually, there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you've had a chance to discuss it, because I know it's very important in North Township, especially folks who live along Clark Street, but also other commercial corridors. We wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is part of that rubric of, it might not affect you directly in terms of your own assessment, but it does affect your community. It does affect the size of the tax bases. We changed our policy on vacancy, last year in 2020, based on the input that we got from communities all over Chicago, including Lincoln Park in the 43rd Ward. Your alderman who's here with us tonight, Michelle Smith, really had alerted us during our, when we were in our transition to this administration, to say, we need to look at the vacancy policies that have been put into place by the assessor's office, because we think it's encouraging and incentivizing vacancy. And with that input, not only from the Lakeview Chamber, which was really an intellectual leader on this, along with Alderman Smith, but also with other chambers that they connected us with all over the city and South Shore and in the Northwest Side and other far-flung parts of the city. People are seeing the same problem, that we would give an assessment reduction of up to 90% for a space being vacant. And that seemed to encourage commercial property being stashed and kept vacant, to the detriment of all the hardworking businesses that stay open, to the detriment of the vitality on the commercial corridors, to the detriment of employment, to the detriment of our sales tax collection, which puts more burden on the property taxes. So for a bunch of reasons, we changed that. And now what we do is we give credit for the neighborhood vacancy rates to every commercial property owner, regardless of whether the property is open or not. So that actually kind of rewards people who keep a business fully occupied, but it also reflects market practice, where if there's someone to buy it, they would assume that there's going to be some vacancy in the future. And at the same time, if someone claims more vacancy than the average vacancy rate in the neighborhood, what then we do is we give you partial credit for the additional amount of vacancy for a temporary period. And we're starting to see, just talking to Alderman Smith and others, that is starting to reactivate some of these spaces that have been kept vacant for a long time. So I wanted to add that, because I know that's of special concern to some of the folks here tonight.
Can I thank you, interrupt for a second to say thank you so much for that, Assessor Kagi, for 43rd Ward residents who are on the line. These vacancy things really were the first thing I ever talked to then a candidate, Katie, about. And we've actually seen fruit. For the first time in over 10 years, one of the vacancies on Armitage Avenue just filled with a jewelry store from one of our most notorious landlords. I've also been approached by another owner of one of the long vacancies on Lincoln Avenue who said, I'm not getting as much vacancy as I used to get, so I got to do something with this property, who actually said that to me. So I am very excited about this, because
I am so excited, Michelle. That's good
excited
to hear.
That. This has been a wall against which we have been knocking our heads for the entire time I've been alderman and before. So I really think that this policy is going to help us chip away at that. And while I still don't quite understand one line of what you're saying, Fritz, I'm delighted, which is when you're saying you're claiming a vacancy, do you mean that the owner is saying, I want a 90% reduction in my value? Is that the vacancy that they're claiming? Is that what they're saying? Like they're saying my property is vacant, therefore lower my assessment by 90%, and then you cut that in half or something? Is that how it works?
Well, what happens is that a property owner will say that my property is vacant to X and X a percentage, and therefore that's a detriment to the value of my building, and therefore my assessment should be cut. And that's maybe true to an extent, but the problem is that the past practice of, if a property was 100% vacant, cutting the assessment by up to 90% was ridiculous, because if you keep an office building vacant or a retail space vacant its value in the market does not decline 90%. And that was clearly wrong. And so it was creating an incentive for investment strategies where people would stash the land, keep it inactive, and hope to make money on the back end through the appreciation of the land and redevelopment opportunity later, to all the other detriments that I mentioned. So what we changed is to say that, look, we're going to measure the vacancy rate on corridors and give that credit to every single space, whether it's occupied or not, because that's what a buyer would do. That's what a reasonable, prudent buyer would do. And then if you're claiming additional vacancy as a detriment, we, just as a market participant, would give additional, would mark it down somewhat for the additional vacancy, but not one for one. And we'd only do it temporarily, because a reasonable buyer, if they bought a space on Armitage or Lincoln or Clark, would very reasonably expect that they could occupy the space and earn rent there. The only disappointing thing about the policy, Michelle, is that I don't live at Cleveland and Belden anymore, so I'm not there to experience the benefits of these reactivated spaces, because I saw all that vacancy space when I lived there before, and we're glad we're addressing that longstanding problem that we've heard loud and clear from you and your constituents.
Well, thank you. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Those are just two I just noticed immediately, but I believe that there are more. So thank you all for that information. I really appreciate it. It's really what we've been looking for.
And you can help. You and your local chamber can help, because the key to this policy succeeding is measuring the vacancy rate on these corridors accurately. So we want to continue conversations with the Lakeview Chamber and other organizations in the community that can measure that vacancy rate, so that we have an accurate measure, so that we can give that credit to the spaces that are open and reflect the reality that's there.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for joining us. Sorry for interrupting.
Not at all. It's good to have this kind of conversation. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, again, is exciting to us. It's exciting to the assessor's office, because it means real economic development in neighborhoods. And it means that the overall tax burden on both residents and commercial property owners can come down, because when you expand the tax base, tax rates come down for everybody. So it's just really what fairness means. And so it's been great, Alderman Smith, to have your support in this, because, and it's, as you've said, it's making real change in the neighborhood. So thanks for all your advocacy on that. All right, we're going to jump back into our presentation. So thanks both to Assessor Kagi and to Alderman Smith for talking a little bit more about how this policy is helping folks. We're going to go ahead and reshare the presentation here just in a moment. Okay, so we've got two different forms up here. One on the left is your residential assessment notice, and the one on the right is your second installment property tax bill. So the assessment notice is the one you've received most recently in the mail. You're seeing the increase in your assessed value going up over the past few years. An important thing to keep in mind is, just because you see that the estimated market value has changed this year does not mean that it is a one-year increase. The thing that's missing on here is the 2018 value. So you can't see how the increase has gone up over the past 3 years. An important thing to keep in mind is that your assessment, as we mentioned earlier, only affects your second installment property tax bill. And that's going to be the one that you get next year in 2022. The first installment tax bill that you get in the beginning of next year is always, by law, 55% of whatever you paid in total taxes the year before. The second installment reflects any of your exemptions, any changes to your assessment, any changes due to appeal, and your overall assessed value. So you're going to be looking for next year's tax bill to reflect any changes in this year's assessment. Now, I mentioned before about having a specific date to appeal. That is October 19th. That is approximately, what is that, 13 days, 12 days away. So October 19th is the deadline to file an appeal for North Chicago Township. So whether you're going to do that, look at that tonight or maybe over the weekend, make sure to go to cookcountyassessor.com/appeals because that's going to give you a bunch of information about how to file an appeal. October 19th is the deadline by which you need to file an appeal in North Chicago. Now, I mentioned a little bit, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A if it's of interest, but we talked about a new opportunity in the online appeal system to file what are called comparable properties. When you get to the online appeal system, you have two different types of residential appeals: residential and residential with comparable grid. Comparable grid is the one that if you want to file a appeal based on uniformity, or you want to show how other properties in your area are assessed lower than your similar property, you want to use the residential with comparable grid appeal. Because what it'll allow you to do when you go into the appeals, online appeals portal, in the comparable select function of that online appeal, this will allow you to search for comparable parcels. You can also change the types of characteristics that you're looking at. Maybe you want to expand it so that the square footage is expanded a little bit because you can't find a comparable in your area. What you'll get is a set of search results that allows you to add additional comparable properties to your appeal. It used to be that you had to specifically go into the Cook Viewer website in order to find comparable properties. Now you can actually do this within the online appeals portal itself. So keep that in mind. That is with residential with comparable grid. It allows you to search for homes that are very similar to yours and add them directly into the appeal. You can also add attachments. This is an important thing to keep in mind because it allows you to attach a narrative. Again, let's say there's information that you want to tell us about your property. You can actually upload just a basic Word doc that has information about your property. You can even embed photos in there. You could upload information about additional comparable properties. One thing to keep in mind, though, there is a section in the appeals called additional pins. That is only if your property has multiple pins attached to it. If you don't have multiple pins attached to your property, do not use the additional pins section. If you want to show us information about comparable properties, if you want to give us a Word document that explains why your property is so much different than other properties in the area, make sure to use the attachment section in order to upload that information. Now, we have a whole online appeal system that I'll just walk you briefly through in just a moment, but it's important to know that all of our different services are available online at cookcountyassessor.com. Now, if you want to come down to the Cook County Assessor's office downtown, you can do that. We have reopened for in-person visits. You can also go to a branch office. All in-person visits require a mask, physical distancing, and you have the opportunity for an optional health screening when you come into the building. Now, you do need to get an appointment in order to come down to the office. Easiest way to do that is to go to cookcountyassessor.com. There is a link right on the homepage that allows you to set up an appointment. You can also follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also call our office at 312-443-7550. Very briefly, I'm going to take folks through the online appeal system just to give you a sense of how to find it. And then we're going to jump into the Q&A. So this is our website. When you get to the website, first off, if you would like to come down to the office, you can go right here to schedule an appointment. You click on the appointment link, then click on the schedule appointment button. And you can book an appointment at the downtown office. You can choose the reason why you'd like to visit our office, if you're looking for information on exemptions perhaps, or if you're looking to do a residential appeal. So that's available at cookcountyassessor.com. Now, to file an appeal, whoops, there we go. Click on the Appeals tab and go to Appeal Online. There's a brief video that will explain how to do an online appeal. You can read this information here and then click on the Launch Online Appeal portal. One thing I want to draw your attention to, we have 3 different guides to how to file an appeal. We have an extensive online appeal document here that actually shows you step-by-step how to file an online appeal. Now, when you open it, you will see that this is about 50 pages long. It is mostly pictures and mostly screenshots because we want to make it as clear as possible about how to file for those appeals. We also have frequently asked questions about online appeals. So you can use either of those. If you feel like you want a step-by-step guide, we've provided that. If you feel like you just got a couple of different questions, you can use our FAQ. Most of the information you'll need to start filing your appeal is in this quick start guide right here. And then just click on that blue button. And this will take you into the available filings. And here's those residential and residential with comparable grid appeals. Just click on residential with comparable grid, click on begin filing, and enter your PIN, and then you'll go through the rest of the steps. I'm not going to go through all the steps of the online appeal process. That's why we have the guide for the appeals up there. So one question that we heard in the Q&A was whether you can add an appraisal or any additional documents to the appeal filing after the October 19th appeal deadline. You can upload additional documents, but if you're doing it after the deadline, they may or may not be included in your appeal filing. Now, one thing you can do is if you can file the appeal and then add supplemental documents in the attachment section. So you can do it after the appeal deadline, but because it's after the appeal deadline, please note that it may or may not be included when your appeal is reviewed. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Another question that we received in the chat was if you are able to, as a condo owner, if you're appealing for the reason of overvaluation, is it okay to submit recent sales from your own condo versus comps in the neighborhood? So the best kind of comps are going to be for comps in that building as a condo owner. So that's definitely something that you want to submit. You can submit it for the unit that you own, or you could submit it for other condos in that building that are comparable to yours. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as a condo owner. Another thing that you'll want to know about as a condo owner is that oftentimes your condo association board may file an appeal for the entire building on your behalf. So you want to find out how they're doing it. You can decide whether or not you want to be a part of that appeal, but you may not need to file an appeal as a condo owner because your condo association board may be doing that. Another question on condos: if the assessment of a condominium property or sales from the past 3 years of similar units in the same building, can that be a driver of the assessed value? It can be. But we're not just going to be looking at your building, we're going to be looking at similar condo buildings as well. Now, the comparable grid does not work as well for condos. The best thing to do is to be looking at other comparable sales. So really what you want to be doing there is filing for an overvaluation appeal and looking at different sales in the area and filing on that. And again, a question on the condo association filing. Can you use the additional PIN feature? Yes, you absolutely should. When you file as a condo association, use the additional PIN feature. That's a really important thing to keep in mind. So I think we've knocked off all of the different condo questions that we've received. Another question that we received here is any impact due to assessed value due to COVID? It's short-lived. How will an assessment address that eventual readjustment? So great question. We did do COVID adjustments last year based on the assessed value of properties that we were seeing at the beginning of last year. As many people know, during the early part of the pandemic, housing values had cratered. They had gone down significantly. We tend to look at appraisal dates or assessment dates in the beginning of the year when we're doing appeals. In the statute, it says that the quote unquote lien date is January 1st. We delayed that slightly because of the enormous impact of the governor's stay-at-home order. We did look at some sales that were happening after that lien date and used a lien date slightly later in the year in order to make sure that we were taking into account the real estate effects that were happening as a result of the pandemic. And so you did see some assessed values that came out last year that had a COVID adjustment, which meant that the assessed value was reduced due to the effect of COVID on residential values. Now, That was short-lived for people in Chicago because everyone in Chicago was scheduled this year to be reassessed. So we are actually assessing Chicagoans based on sales that were occurring throughout 2020 last year. And that, as I mentioned, does include some pretty high increases in assessed value that we were seeing at the end of last year. Now, if you're in the north or south suburbs, those COVID values are going to remain in place until the next time you're reassessed. For the north suburbs, that's next year. For the south suburbs, that's 2 years from now. And just looking through some of the other questions here, I think we've taken care of most of those. The date that the assessor's office uses for the 2021 reassessment is value as of January 1st. So whatever the property looked to be selling for on the January 1st is the date that we're using for assessments. But keep in mind, we're not just looking at your property, we're looking at lots of other properties that are similar to yours and the sales of those properties. Lots of folks are surprised that they get an increase in their assessment when they say, hey, I haven't done anything to my property. I didn't add anything. I didn't make any big rehabs. How is it my assessment could go up even though I haven't done anything to the property? It's a great question, but it means that your assessment is reflective of sales of similar properties in your area. Since an assessment, it should be an up to the minute or at least up to the year reflection of your market value. What we're going to be doing is taking into account all kinds of sales over the past 3 years that reflect other homes like yours in order to measure what your current market value is. We had another question here is, can an appraisal from a real estate agent be considered as part of an appeal? You can offer an appraisal as part of your appeal. That appraisal needs to be up to what are called USPAP standards. There are specific federal guidelines for for appraisals, and any appraisal or appraisal company that's following those USPAP standards, that appraisal can be submitted in the attachment section as part of evidence for an appeal. But keep in mind that if you're submitting an appraisal that does not follow those standards, then we may or may not actually accept that as part of the appeal value. So here's a question. Everyone on our block is getting a 50% increase. There's no way that properties went up in value like that. Single home sale prices, not citywide, but in our area of East Lincoln Park, are stagnant due to various factors. It's possible that we didn't get your assessment correct. We're not perfect, and we do use a mass appraisal system. So we are not going to get every single assessment right in the initial assessment. If you're seeing a market value on the assessment that you believe does not reflect what that property could go for on the open market at this point, that's a good argument for an appeal. You should be looking at other comparable properties. You should be making an argument as part of your appeal that the assessment is too high, but you have to provide some specific reasons why you believe it's too high. Lots of folks just look at the increase in the assessed value. It's really important to look at the market value number on your assessment notice. And if that is what you think it's not going to go for on the open market, then that's a good argument for an appeal. There are many different factors that may contribute to what errors could be in an assessment. For example, your home or other homes on your block may be compared to very recent new buildings, and the building that is your home may be a very much older building. And so that's going to be important for us to consider. You may want to make an argument that the age of your building means the property that you have is less. Maybe there's something else going on the block that may contribute to why your home should not be compared with homes that are nearby. It's important for you to make those arguments in the appeal. It's why we allow you to upload a Word document that really reflects everything that's going on in your home. Again, you know your home better than anybody. And so it's important that you don't just necessarily hand that off to a property tax attorney to make the appeal for you. You can file an appeal for free. You can tell us everything we need to know about why you think your assessment is too high. Getting a couple questions about the dates of an appraisal. You can have a date of an appraisal be fairly recent and within the last couple of years. It doesn't necessarily need to be done this year. And there are a couple of folks who are asking about questions about when the lien date is or when the assessment date is. That's January 1st of this year, 2021. And I'm just looking to make sure that we've tackled everything in the chat. And I'm going to look at briefly just some folks that were adding questions into the chat that weren't answered in the Q&A. I know Hector and Michelle have been answering most of the questions that showed up in there. So let's take a look. How do we know if our property was assessed correctly if we don't have access to neighbors' new assessments? Previous neighbors' assessments are available online, but where are the new ones? So here's a way that you can check into what your neighbors' assessments are. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. And you can go to our website, scroll down to where you see search by address. You can scroll down to the bottom where it says search by neighborhood. Scroll down to North Chicago. And then you want to look at neighborhood codes. So what is a neighborhood code? On your assessment notice, you're going to see neighborhood and then a number next to it. The neighborhood code for you is going to be the area on the map of North Chicago that we have your home in. So if you're looking to see how your neighbors were reassessed and where your assessment falls within the folks around you, just select the neighborhood code. And then for property class, select the type of property that you have. Now you'll see your property code, whether it's 204, 205, 206 on your assessment notice, but you don't necessarily need to know what your specific property code is. All you need to do is just find the description of your property that you see in this box. So let's say you have a 2 or more story resident over 62 years. You can just select that. Make sure to tell us you're not a robot and hit the search button. It looks like we're having an error. I'm going to click into our advanced search. And rerun that search again. All right, well, it looks like I limited our search criteria too much and we only found one property. So let's see if we can expand that a little more. Okay, sorry for the delay on that. So this will allow you to see all the different types of properties that are similar to yours, and you'll be able to look at the different assessed values for those properties. So you can compare your home to other different kinds of homes. You can also go to the Cook Viewer program as well. All you have to do is just type Cook Viewer into Google or a similar search engine. You'll be able to find that site. And you'll be able to actually see a map of your neighborhood and click on the different properties literally next to yours that'll allow you to see the different assessed values of those homes. We've gotten another question in the Q&A that they're about significant delays in the appeals process and that they're taking a long time. So this is a great question. Normally by this point in the assessment and appeals process, you would see different townships posting their appeal results. The reason you haven't seen that yet this year is because our assessor's office is completely swapping out the mainframe computer that is decades old. It's over 40 years old, and it has been used as the basis for the entire Cook County property tax system. It is a project this year to begin phase one of replacing that mainframe computer system with a modern, state-of-the-art property tax system that our office, the Board of Review, the Cook County Clerk, and the Cook County Treasurer will eventually use. So in that transition to the new system, there's been a bit of a delay in getting the system ready to accept all the different appeal results. We have been processing appeals. We are ready to begin posting that, and we're finalizing some of the technical backend things that need to happen in order to make sure that all the information is correct and delivered to property owners. So while there has been some delay in posting the appeal results, we have been processing appeals this entire time. We are anticipating that that information will be up very soon, and you'll start seeing the appeal results. So I would say that there is a delay, not so much in processing the appeals, but in putting all the appeal results online. This is the kind of thing that happens when you are working with a new assessment system or any type of new computer system. So it's something to keep in mind. We will be posting the updated results very soon. And the good thing about it is that this new property tax system will allow us to actually start putting more information online than we ever have in the past. It used to be that in order to get specific information about your property and the way in which the analyst processed your appeal, you needed to work through our FOIA department, for example. Now you'll be able to access all that information online directly. We plan on being able to put that, what's called a public access system, up online probably in the next several months. I realize that obviously nobody likes delays, and nobody likes having to wait for any kind of technical kinks to get worked out. But it is the type of long-term investment in technological modernization that Assessor Kagi has promised as part of his reform of the office. I'm just going to briefly look inside the chat for a couple of more questions. Some questions about how to file an appeal. If you take pictures of damage to your home, can that be made public domain? This is an important question. Any appeal information that you post that is part of your appeal of your home is something that can be as a public document. You can find out that information by filing a FOIA request for it. So it is important, if you are taking pictures of your home to document any kind of damage, that is part of a public document. It is part of a public record and could be used or could be viewed by someone. Another question about how are discrepancies in home characteristics verified? Great question. If you are seeing that we have your home's characteristics wrong on your assessment notice, you should file an appeal. And as part of the appeal, file for change in property characteristics. When you're in the online appeal system, you will see a box that says field check requested. A field check literally means two things. One, we're using computer software in order to verify that we have the correct dimensions of your home. We use a product called EagleView that is best described as a sort of souped up version of Google Street View. It allows us to actually see electronic imaging of the exterior of the home in order to double check our assessments. The other thing we do is we send actual representatives from the field or from our field staff from the assessor's office out to your property to inspect the exterior only of the home and check the measurements and check all the different information that we have on your assessment notice. So it's a combination of using technological software and also using actual folks that go out and check into the property. So someone's asking a question about how long the commercial vacancy runs for. Properties are reassessed every 3 years, but vacancy is something that you have to apply for every year. So in order to receive any kind of reduction in your assessment due to vacancy, you as a commercial property owner need to apply for that every year. So our initial assessment will always be based on what we think the property could go for in the market. But if you want to apply for additional vacancy, you would have to apply for that every single year. Someone was asking about notices online. The best way to see if you, for some reason, haven't received your print assessment notice, just go to our website, go to the address section where you search for the address off the homepage, and you can look up your address and you'll be able to see all the detail from your assessment notice there. You won't see the actual PDF of a printout of that assessment notice, but all of the detail in that assessment notice is available online. We had another question about, do your systems give us access to actual sales data in the township for my class of building? If you're filing an appeal, yes. So you remember to use that comparable grid option for a residential appeal. And when you use the comparable select tool, what you'll get is actual market value data and of the properties in your area. Those are used with actual sales data. Now, if you wanted to research recent sales, for example, sales that have happened recently in 2021, those would not be available in our online appeal system. You can go online in order to be able to review that information. You can look at sites like Zillow or Redfin to get that, but we would not provide the actual sales data. We would also not have 2021 sales. That information is not necessarily reflected in your assessment because the lien date is January 1st. Now, a lot of folks are saying that their assessment has gone up more than what realtors are saying that the home can sell for. And again, that is a really good reason for an appeal. If you think that we have not assessed your home correctly, then we can absolutely accept your appeal. It's best to give us data. It's best to make an argument based on home sales that are recent. It's best to tell us other comparable properties in your area that are a reflection of what you think your home is worth. So I believe we've covered all of the questions that we received in the Q&A and the chat. We've just got one question left here about the equalizer. The equalizer is very interesting. The equalizer is under Illinois law, all assessments have to be 33 1/3 of the market value of the area. Now, in Cook County, we do things a little differently. Assessed values of residential homes are 10% of the market value, whereas commercial assessed values are 25% of market value. So the equalizer is really just about bringing up all of the assessments to the same level. Because there is a differential in the assessed value of residential and commercial, the equalizer is applied so that by law, all properties are being assessed by 33 1/3. Now, some folks think that because you're multiplying by the tax rate and the equalizer, that you're getting hit twice. It's not really true. It's really just kind of truing up all the assessments to the correct assessed value. And with that, I'm going to wrap up tonight's presentation. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. You had a choice about showing up to an event about property taxes and appeals, and you chose to be here for that. I'm really glad that you did. I hope we provided valuable information. October 19th is your final date for appeal. So do be sure to make sure to file your appeal before that date. And I'm going to go ahead and give Alderman Smith and Assessor Kagi the chance to make some final remarks. Alderman Smith, you're muted.
I just wanted to thank you, Assessor Kagi, and you, Scott, for the really informative presentation tonight. And thank you so much for making yourselves available to our constituents.
And thank you, Alderman. Thanks for convening us here tonight, for your good offices, for all the advice and insight you're providing us. And thanks to all the other electeds online with us tonight too. For everyone for being here tonight. We know you can be many places. We hope the information is useful. If you need any other help, again, there are all sorts of other different ways that you can reach out to us that Scott's provided. And we'll be here for you. We're here to help. And thank you very much for being with us here tonight. So bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us, and make sure to go to cookcountyassessor.com to file your appeal or look up any additional information. And with that, thank you.